This story is ridiculous, childish, frustrating, strangely familiar. We made a video about it. We made a video about blackmail at the World Cup with the US national team. It involved the Reynas, a royal family of US soccer, the head coach of the team, Gregg Berhalter, his wife, an incident between them in 1992. We ended that video with, well, we'll just have to wait and see what the investigation uncovers. Well, the investigation is done, and it has uncovered that the Reynas suck. I mean, really, really suck. Not Gio, but his parents. Just awful people in every way that you can get in this investigation, which is hilarious because they're the reason this investigation is happening. They were trying to destroy somebody else's reputation and ended up eviscerating their own reputation. It's like throwing a pie into the wind and then it just blows back and hits you straight in the face. That's what they did. And we're going to talk a lot about the Reynas, but the original, most important part of the investigation was what happened between Gregg Berhalter and his wife in 1992, and was it part of a larger problem? And the answer was, one, kind of exactly what they both said happened, and two, no, not at all. In fact, somehow the investigation has made Gregg and Rosalind Berhalter look better than they did when it started. Now, they published the entire final report, so that is what we're working off of. We're not, getting the report secondhand here. I am reading the report to you, and for this particular incident, I'm just gonna read you what happened so that you can make your own final judgments off of it. Now, this is when Gregg Berhalter and his wife, now wife of 25 years, Rosalind, were dating at 18 years of age at the University of North Carolina. They were both on their respective soccer teams, the men's and women's soccer teams at the school. They got into an argument inside a club when Mr. Berhalter became jealous that Mrs. Berhalter was giving attention to another athlete. They continued arguing when they left the nightclub and got into a physical altercation on a nearby street. It's mentioned earlier they were both drunk at this point in the evening. The fight became physical when Mrs. Berhalter hit Mr. Berhalter in the face. It escalated when Mr. Berhalter pushed Mrs. Berhalter down and kicked her twice. It ended when a bystander tackled Mr. Berhalter. Then Mrs. Berhalter went back to her dorm room. Mr. Berhalter did the same. Neither filed a police report or sought any medical attention from the actual incident. But what it actually ends up making both of them look a lot better is the way they both handled it, particularly Gregg Berhalter. First of all, Mr. Berhalter self-reported his actions to the head coach of the men's soccer team the day after it happened. That is an incredible amount of accountability, and Mrs. Berhalter, Rosalind, did the same thing, reported the incident to the head of the women's soccer team. A tremendous amount of accountability from both of them to immediately report what had happened. Then Mr. Berhalter took huge, significant steps to address his actions and better himself after the fact. Not only did he immediately self-report the incident to the coach, he reported it to his academic counselor. He made efforts to apologize to Mrs. Berhalter. He told his parents and family what happened. He sought counseling. He did volunteer work at a women's prison. He stayed away from Mrs. Berhalter at her request for approximately 7 to 8 months and only began to interact with her again when she reached out to him at or around the fall of the next academic year. And then they began dating again, got married 5 years later, and have been happily married for 25 years, according to the interview with both of them conducted by the investigation and interviews conducted with other people that have knowledge of the situation. Look, what Gregg Berhalter did was obviously not good, but the way he handled the situation was becoming of somebody that learns from their mistakes and had the potential to be a future leader. But now you know everything that happened according to an extensive investigation, so you can form your own opinions. But what was clear is that nothing that happened on that night got anywhere close to having any legal ramifications or to being disqualifying for being the head coach of the US national team, according to any US soccer bylaws. In this New York Times article, they pulled other quotes about how the investigators said they were impressed by Gregg Berhalter's candor and demeanor throughout the interviewing process, and that they found absolutely no discrepancies between Gregg and Rosalind Berhalter's description of the incident. In a statement Gregg Berhalter released after the report came out, he said, "Rosalind and I respect the process that US soccer went through. We are grateful that it is concluded and look forward to what is next." And it every step of the way, the candor, the accountability, the maturity displayed by both of the Berhalters in dealing with this situation is just such a stark contrast from the way the Reynas handled absolutely everything that happened in this story, that it is just worth pointing out. But before we get into their childishness, we would like to use the eyeballs that it attracts to do some good in the world and help fund our editing team by thanking our sponsor for this video, Manscaped. Which fortunately for me, because I have now had to shave my head in a charitable endeavor, they have beard products, which is the only thing keeping me from looking like an absolute cue ball. But this new Beard Hedger Pro Kit's absolutely fantastic, and at the link at the top of the description, you can get yourself 20% off and free shipping. And then you may be able to look this good, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm talking about. When you get the Beard Hedger Pro Kit, it looks a lot like this. Fancy scissors. We've got a nice little beard comb right here. But then there is the piece de resistance. It's cordless, it's waterproof, it has 20 different length settings. Look at that, look at them numbers right there. You know, it's the 21st century, and it's not just about the razor, because there's a bunch of dermatologist-approved pre- and post-shave products that are available to you in this beautiful little case right here. And once you get your face figured out, you can get the Performance Package 4.0. It's got the Weed Whacker 2.0 for all your ear and nose hair, and then all of your bases are covered. And all of that for 20% off and free shipping at the link in the top of the description. Thank you to Manscaped for allowing us to afford such fabulous editors. You know who probably didn't use Manscaped? The Reynas. Now, it's important to mention off the top, were any criminal laws violated? No. It says that here, but make an argument that they came pretty dang close. Because in their description of the word no here, they do say the Reynas did tell Mr. Stewart during the December 11th phone call that they were thinking about starting to spread the story about the 1992 incident to others privately, which might implicate New York penal law, whatever. But Mrs. Reyna did not demand something in exchange for not disclosing that information. Thus, the first element of this offense is likely not satisfied, being, you know, a listed demand. But there is an implicit demand in the way the Reynas actually went about this. And I'll show you. And let me remind you of something else as we dive into the filth here. Nothing you are about to read was found to have breached US soccer rules at all. None of this, and that will get more insane as we just list this off. We'll start this off in 2018. That's not the first illicit contact between Claudio Reyna and the US Soccer Federation. It's just the first one that I want to bring up because it's insane and just completely off the chain. If you want to read the actual whole thing, of course, the whole report's listed in the description along with every source for this video. The email in question from 2018 was sent to a redacted member of the US Federation, and that person says that in July 2018, Mr. Reyna sent an email after a match that Gio Reyna played in was officiated poorly and said, and in all honesty, can we get real and have male refs for a game like this? It's embarrassing, guys. What are we trying to prove? A game like this deserves better attention. The ref for the game in question was a female. Mr. Reyna didn't like that very much in 2018, 5 years ago, when Gio Reyna was playing as a 15-year-old. Even if you're sexist enough to think that male officials should be on the most important games, no game Gio Reyna is playing as a 15-year-old would be in the classification of the most important games, so you're just wrong on every possible front at the same time. But let's keep it going. Let's fast forward. Remember Ernie Stewart from the first video? The guy that's the technical director of US Soccer that hired Gregg Berhalter and was hired by Gregg Berhalter's brother? Yeah, this story's fun, isn't it? Well, he informed the investigation that Mr. Reyna began making complaints to him in November 2019 during the U17 World Cup that, of course, Gio Reyna was playing at. He said he received complaints about Gio Reyna's lack of playing time and adequate travel arrangements, specifically not flying business class. Oh, shut up. It's the U17 World Cup, dude. I don't fly business class. Not that it matters. Maybe someday, but what? Mr. Stewart also provided contemporaneous text messages from this period. Mr. Stewart commented that in his more than 20 years in this business, he has never had these types of discussions with other players' parents. Then stop it. Then don't put up with it. Then put a rule in place in 2019 that the random father, even if he did used to play for the US national team, can't just be texting the technical director of the United States freaking Federation about a U17 World Cup player who is slightly displeased with his hotel accommodations. Stop it. You could have stopped it right now. Why are you appeasing these psychos? This wasn't just Ernie Stewart either. Gregg Berhalter, who at this point was the head coach of the U.S. national team, he'd been at that post for less than a year, received a text from Claudio Reyna saying that the coach of the U17 national team was, and I quote, the worst coach. And then he'd also received texts complaining about Gio Reyna's treatment, travel arrangements, and coaches. So Claudio was just bombing anybody he could get the ear of. The head coach of the US national team was getting texts from an angry parent of a U17 player. How do you not stop this earlier? I mean, Gregg Berhalter said that what occurred at the 2022 World Cup was similar to what occurred at the U17 World Cup. You knew this was how they behave. And it wasn't just Ernie Stewart and Gregg Berhalter. It was also the general manager of the US Soccer Federation, Brian McBride, who had one of my favorite statements about the whole thing. Mr. McBride said he began receiving the complaints when he assumed the general manager role in January 2020. The moment he took the job, he's getting texts from Claudio too. Somebody take away Claudio's phone. But that's the buildup. These people are bending the ear off of every major official in the US Soccer Federation, and then we get to the World Cup, where Gregg Berhalter has Gio Reyna coming back from injury and goes to him and says, look, you're not going to play a huge role at this World Cup because we have our team set in the way that we like to play. And while I personally do not agree with that and think Gio Reyna should have been given a bigger role, the insanity of his parents was essentially triggered once Gio Reyna moped around a few training sessions and Gregg said, figure it out or go home. And Gio went, you're right, I'll figure it out, and Gio stuck around. That's why I kind of feel bad for Gio Reyna in this situation, because, you know, he moped around like a teenager, but then when the coach said, figure it out or go home, he figured it out, and he was a bit part player for the rest of the World Cup and had a better attitude. His parents didn't, though. So the first game is against Wales, and there's a friends and family section of every national team, and that friends and family section has the Berhalters and Reynas as great friends. So the extended family of Gregg Berhalter's on a bus, and the redacted name of the person in the US organization who's in charge of planning this stuff puts the Reynas on the same bus. So they're toodalooing to the stadium together. They watch the Wales match. They stay at the stadium for another hour after it to talk to the players, and then they go to get back on the bus. Cue Soccer Mom, the Real Housewives of US soccer. Showtime. As people began departing for the buses, Mrs. Reyna said, I'm not getting back on that bus. The organizer, expressed confusion, and Mrs. Reyna replied, I don't think you understand. I'm not getting back on that bus because the Berhalter family was on it, because Gio Reyna didn't play. That's it. That is it. I'm not getting on that bus. Shut up. It's the World Cup. It's not the World Cup of you. It's the World Cup. Your son is hurt. He's a freaking teenager. He's an incredible player. Chill. Like 1 ounce of perspective here, please. The organizer said this led to potential drama. Everyone in the friends and family groups saw the switch, but no issue happened. Everyone heard in real time from people running in the family program that the Reynas were vocal in their displeasure and they wouldn't get on the bus. They wouldn't share the bus. Gregg's not even on the bus. It's Gregg's family. Now, Danielle Reyna comes up to the organizer the day after and wants to explain herself more clearly, but then somehow just manages to Real Housewives of US soccer it up even more. She says the organizer tries to dismiss it. Things happen. No problem. That's what they said right there. But then she says, no, it's much more than that. You're talking about 40 years of history between us for something like this to happen. And then said something along the lines of, once this tournament is over, I can make one phone call and give one interview and his cool sneakers and bounce passes will be gone. Now look, I realize she is not stating a demand here, but she is making it very clear that she has damaging information that can remove him from his post. At least she believes that. Also, that's an insane thing to say. The organizer said the vibe was like, I can take him down. Yeah. Now Gregg identified that Wales match as the inflection point in their entire relationship. Now, if you remember from the first video, the now Mrs. Reyna and Mrs. Berhalter grew up together, played together at UNC, and they talked apparently on the phone daily. They had talked every day for decades, and it ended immediately. Gregg said in the stands after the match, surrounded by other families, they didn't speak. So this was great relationship, great relationship, great relationship. Gio doesn't play for one game. What is wrong with you? Get me off that bus! And there's just a hilarious quote from Gregg Berhalter. There were 150 people in the Friends and Family program at this year's World Cup. All were having a great time, except for 5 people who were absolutely miserable. Those 5 were cursing, acting horribly. It was the Reynas. And initially, I would think that quote came because Gregg Berhalter was having his past dredged up, but the more information we learn, the more that seems to be bang on of what actually happened. The Reynas were just miserable at the World Cup the whole time. Ernie Stewart, who you met earlier, I feel the need to remind you, the technical director of the whole US Federation, got a text message from a player's dad, Claudio Reyna, after the first match that said, "What a complete and utter fucking joke. Our family is disgusted, in case you were wondering. Disgusted at how a coach is allowed to never be challenged and do whatever he wants." I'm sorry, is this high school soccer? I mean, this isn't AAU. This isn't travel ball. There are more than the parents in the stands with an emotional investment in this game if you can get out of your own freaking world for 5 seconds. I don't agree with how Gregg Berhalter got the job, but there are 50,000 legitimate ways to attack the guy other than making his life miserable and dredging up something he and his wife handled 30 freaking years ago. That was specifically to Mrs. Reyna, now back to Mr. Reyna, who also sent a text to Brian McBride, the general manager of the whole freaking federation, that said, "Our entire family is disgusted, angry, and done with you guys. Don't expect nice comments from anyone in our family about US soccer. I'm being transparent to you, not like the political clown show of the Federation." That last sentence, pretty justified, but somehow, some way, the Reynas have just managed to take that and make themselves look so much worse. How about this? 3 days later, and this is the craziest part of the entire story to me. 3 days later, the general manager and the technical director of the entire US Federation had a sit-down meeting with the Reynas a day before the match against England. Do you think there's something more important those guys could have been doing than consoling rogue soccer parents? Now, McBride said the purpose of the meeting was to help the Reynas understand the decision about Gio Reyna's playing time. That sums up my entire feeling on the subject. And McBride also commented that such a meeting would not typically occur with parents of players. Duh! Why are you doing this? Why are there no rules to stop this? I remind you, there are no rules in place that make any of this not okay, according to the US Federation, which is crazy. They did the meeting as a courtesy to Claudio because of their long-standing friendship and what he's meant to the game, but instead, as with everything interacting with the Reynas, it made it worse. They recalled Mr. Reyna stating, "You guys don't even know what we know about Gregg." Well, what's that supposed to mean, Claudio? Both McBride and Stewart really emphasized over the course of the report that they were not letting those text messages affect decisions being made about Gio Reyna's playing time, which obviously I hope so, but the Reynas were just going absolutely nuclear. And then you know the story from there. Danielle Reyna calls up Ernie Stewart and says, "Hey, by the way, Gregg did this in 1992. Now, what result was she expecting from that? Legally, we have no idea, but it seems rather obvious to me that the Reynas attempted to burn the whole thing to the ground and accidentally burned themselves to the ground in the process. Now, Brian McBride has moved on, Ernie Stewart has moved on, and US Soccer has a clean slate and no head coach. Gregg Berhalter is still eligible to be rehired, and I hope he doesn't for fan reasons, but not because I dislike him as a person. I think he handled the situation incredibly well, and for the last over 30 years has been kind of an exemplary guy, an exemplary husband, and a guy that did get us to the knockout stages of a World Cup. I think we can do better, but that's not the point. The point is that even Christian Pulisic, the national team star, did a sit-down interview and called the whole thing childish. And Christian, I'd have to agree. This was a very complex and difficult story to put together. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and hit the like button. We'd appreciate it a lot, and that'll encourage us to read more full reports like this. Also, a new thing we're doing on this channel, we were made aware of the fact that we should put the sources for everything on the channel, and I was like, duh, obviously. So there's going to be a source section under every video we do from here on out. That will include this report and every other article that I read to help educate what we were talking about in this video. If you want to check those out, they're down in the description. I will see you on stream, and if you want to keep your binge watching going, here's a video about the next Messi, maybe from the Solomon Islands? Huh? What?